Todd Monken is officially the offensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens, and here on today's episode, we talk about why the fit is perfect for the Baltimore Ravens. We talk scheme, we talk personnel, we get into a mailbag, and so much more coming up next on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for tuning in with us and being here with us today. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes over on YouTube in video form. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL general manager and managing your football franchise, this game is definitely for you to download. The game is visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in all caps. In the game, and we are back here. It is an exciting Wednesday episode as we have Cordell Woodland with us from Shaking It Up Sports over at 105.7. Also, the Winning Drive podcast. And it's exciting, too, because we have a new offensive coordinator in Baltimore here, Todd Monken. The news dropping seemingly out of nowhere on Valentine's Day, right around 11 a.m. And Cordell, I mean, this is something that I know a lot of people are wondering, just why is it taking so long? When is this guy? Who is it? Who is it going to be? They've interviewed all these candidates. There have been second interviews. But when you heard that it was Todd Monken, what was your initial reaction?
I thought it was a great fit. Todd Monken is a guy that we've seen him in Georgia the last couple of years. He's also got experience in Cleveland at the NFL level and Tampa Bay as well. But just more recently, his job at Georgia, the last 2 years, in part being out there, the offensive coordinator at Georgia has won back-to-back national championships. He has been able to milk every ounce of talent out of that group that I think that you could possibly get. And that's without them really having a ton of elite talent at the skill positions on the offensive side of the ball. Tight end this year, for sure. They've got one of the best tight ends in the country. But, outside of that, the last 2 years, it's really been schematically that Georgia has made light work of their opponents. I mean, we saw them just completely demolish TCU in the national championship this year. And sure, the argument can be made that TCU was probably a little in over their head. But you got to give it to these guys, man. Every time Georgia hit on a big play, you had guys running wide open. You just they had an answer for everything. And I think one of the issues for the Ravens last year with Greg Roman, really the last couple of years, is that I felt like Greg Roman was a little too comfortable with, leaving the game with bullets still in his holster, if that makes sense. You look at games this past season, Devin Duvernay, two touches at times. And that's with Rashad Bateman being injured. Too many times I felt like he didn't maximize the talent that he had at his disposal, albeit not a ton of talent on the offensive side of the ball, but there were guys out there at his disposal that could help this team more than he allowed them to. And I think with Todd Monken, you'll see a guy that'll be able to maximize what he has at his disposal.
Right. And I think when you're talking about like a perfect fit, there were a couple of guys that I had kind of put in that category. I thought Eric Bieniemy would have been great. I think he deserves an opportunity. I mean, I think as a head coach, but if he wants to get out of the Andy Reid shadow as an offensive coordinator, but it seemed like for me, Brian Johnson from Philadelphia and Monken were two where it just seemed like schematically those two would have had enough where they could have kept the stuff that Baltimore did well because they'd been in those types of systems, but also bring in some stuff that the Ravens needed to do a bit better, become more creative, more innovative. And I'm not saying Bieniemy couldn't do that. I thought it would have been a great option. But for Monken, Cordell, it just feels like even though he's 3 years at Tampa in the NFL, 1 year in Cleveland as the offensive coordinator, each one of those seasons, 4 NFL seasons as an offensive coordinator, each year he's had at least one 1,000-yard receiver. Mike Evans did it 3 times in Monken's 3 years. And then in Cleveland in 2019, it was both Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham Jr. with 1,000 yards in the same season. Now, Baltimore, Mike Wallace had an 1,000-yard season in 2016. I know many people, it slips their mind. It slipped my mind for a second. Marquise Brown did it in 2021. He had 1,008 yards. Andrews and Hollywood both had 1,000 yards. But I feel like this is a good thing because you can keep being able to be a run team if you really want to, but it's just a matter of balance. So many people just wanted balance in this offense where the run game was great, but the passing game just had way too many inconsistencies. I mean, for me, Cordell, I think Monken will be able to clean up those inconsistencies and be able to call better games because with Roman, I know one of the major things was the play calling was just too suspect at times.
Definitely. And you talk about, the passing game. The passing game trailed behind a lot and versus the run game in this offense without question. It started out hot in September. Lamar's throwing the ball all over the field. They look great. This looks like a new era, to use Lamar's quote, of the Ravens right now. And then after September, it just really nosedived. And I think one thing with Monken is you will see more creativity in the pass game. It has to be. We don't know what the Ravens are going to end up doing at receiver. We know they need to improve that position, but financially, they don't have a lot of wiggle room to do but so much. So I think you're going to have somebody that can schematically get guys open the way Monken can. It didn't work that way with Greg Roman. Too many times you saw guys running in the same area. Too many times you saw some basic route concepts that, were easy to pick up on. I think with Monken, you're going to get a guy that's comfortable with working out of 12 personnel, which we know the Ravens love, but also you're going to get a guy that knows how to be able to be creative in the pass game. There's no reason that Lamar Jackson, as mobile as he is, as explosive of a player as he is, that the Ravens offense should ever be called boring. But it was what it was called multiple times over the last 2 years, and it shouldn't be that way. And I think when you have a guy like Lamar, you have to have somebody that has the creative juices to be able to maximize what Lamar can do out there. At a point, Greg Roman did do that, but I think Lamar outgrew what Greg Roman was able to help him succeed in. I think Todd Monken will help Lamar take his game to the next level.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right there. And part of this also, I mean, we know what that Georgia offense did. You talked about it a bit, Cordell. I mean, in total offense, they were one of 6 teams in college football to average over 500 yards in total offense per game, 501.1 for Georgia. And then in terms of points, they make it easy. They were 5th in points. Yeah. Also, actually, no, they were 4th. They were tied for 4th, 41.1 for both Georgia and Alabama. So just dominant all across the board. And you mentioned, the offensive skill players for Georgia. I'm not saying they weren't talented, but you look at some of these other powerhouses and just how stacked they look, like in LSU recently. I mean, that 2019 LSU team where people just like Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, all these players. But also, Cordell, I think part of this too was the fact that in getting a guy like Todd Monken, you're getting someone who has that air raid background, but also has a success with heavy personnel. Yeah. And I talked about the balance where, again, it's not about abandoning the run. It's not about abandoning what the Ravens did 100% completely. I mean, even John Harbaugh talked about how they wanted to keep some of the stuff from their offenses in the end of season press conference. And he even said, including some of the passing concepts, he made a point to make that. But to me, Cordell, it just feels like if you give this Ravens offense balance, if you give Lamar Jackson, if he's back, balance, I think the sky can be the limit, especially under a play caller like Monken.
I do, and I think that they'll be able to help each other. I think Lamar is still in the process right now to where he is still, I don't want to say the word prove, but I think he's still trying to show the Ravens what he is capable of being to get the type of payday that he feels like he deserves. And right now, I think the Ravens are I think they know Lamar's the guy, but they feel like he, to pay him what it is he's looking for. Number one, obviously they don't want to do, if he's asking for that reported fully guaranteed money, that's not what they're looking to do. But I think that they still want to see, is this an elite quarter? Can Lamar be, a guy that goes toe to toe with Patrick Mahomes on a regular, or is he, did we see the best version of him in 2019? I think Todd Monken coming in will help answer some questions that a lot of people have about Lamar Jackson as a passer. I think it'll open it up a lot more than we've seen in the past. I think it'll do that while also allowing Lamar to do what he does well as a runner. because Todd Monken, like you've mentioned, has been more than creative in the run game, and I expect them to try to keep a lot of what Greg Roman did. So you combine the two, it seems like a really good fit to me, and I just really feel like the Ravens hit a home run here.
Yeah, it feels like a perfect fit for them. And again, they needed somebody who could come in and do this, who could come in and say, this offense, they have a start, but now it's Todd Monken's turn to come in and add his element to this. It had his personal touches. And you mentioned Lamar, Cordell, in the second segment. I do want to touch on a bit about what this does mean for Lamar, his future in Baltimore. Josina Anderson putting out some valuable information over the course of the day. So we'll be right back here on Locked On Ravens as we continue talking about Todd Monken, Lamar Jackson, and this Ravens offense. But first, this episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM, and you've heard me talk about this mobile game app, and I can't tell you how much fun I had competing against my fellow Locked On NFL hosts. Chris Carter of Locked On Steelers was our Locked On NFL champion. I wanted to win, but it just didn't happen. But now it's your turn to compete, but more on that later. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL general manager or managing your football franchise, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. You'll manage every strategic aspect of your team, play through seasons, and lead your team to glory, trying to build a dynasty. With Ultimate Football GM, you're responsible for controlling the destiny of your franchise by hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, navigating your franchise through the free agency and the draft and all the ups and downs of a season. And you can have a ton of fun doing so many immersive things to help your franchise win and win and win. And you can compete with your friends or with your family and all this in a challenging, realistic game where Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline, so you can play on the go as you want and when you want to. We've created Locked On leagues for you to compete against Locked On fans all over the world. Can you be the ultimate Locked On Football GM? Choose a Locked On league in the app to join. Can you create a football dynasty? Locked On Ravens listeners are getting a 100% free boost of their franchise when using the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On in all caps. So make sure to check it out today. Down the game says at ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM, start your dynasty today. We return our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Cordell Woodland. And you mentioned Lamar in the first segment, Cordell, and I think it's very important because obviously this was a huge domino in Todd Monken to fall. We were waiting and waiting and waiting for this to happen. But now the next domino is what happens with Lamar Jackson? Is there a franchise tag? Is there an extension? Is there a trade? Does he just walk in free agency? They're not going to let that happen. He's not walking for nothing. They're at least going to get something. But Josina Anderson's been putting out a lot of valuable information and did put out a lot of valuable information over the course of Tuesday once this hire was announced. And she said that, quote, I'm told since the day after the Ravens and Greg Roman parted ways, quarterback Lamar Jackson's input on the offense from a philosophical and schematic standpoint was folded into the evaluation process for the next offensive coordinator. And communication from key players was welcomed per league source. Now, Josina Anderson is a very credible, trustworthy person to put out this information. So I take what she says at face value. What did you get from this, Cordell? What do you think that this situation in terms of the Ravens, and they talked about it during their end-of-season press conference. John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta said Lamar would be involved in the process. I know some people still questioned it, just how involved would Lamar be. But this, to me at least, seems like a good sign for Lamar.
Yeah, I think it does. I definitely think it's a good fit. Like you said, they told us that Lamar would be involved. I would imagine Todd Monken for him to, take this job because reportedly he had the offer from the Bucs on the table as well. And Georgia still wanted to know what he was going to do. So I would imagine that Todd Monken at least asked about Lamar Jackson. What is the status of Lamar? Maybe the Ravens can't tell him today, or even Lamar can't tell him today, that we're going to have him long term. But maybe they said something to at least make him feel comfortable about Lamar being there for this year coming up. You got to take it one day at a time right now in this process because it's just so unique. And I think a lot of variables are going to play into the Ravens and Lamar long-term extension saga. But I think it bodes well for Lamar coming back. I think he'd be happy, right? I think Lamar, has seen what's gone on out there in Georgia. I think he knows about he would have been able to do a little bit of a background check on Todd Monken and see what he's been able to do in some of his other stops, see how much he helped Baker Mayfield his rookie year when Baker, was lighting it up in the NFL, setting the rookie record for touchdown passes, and even Tampa Bay as well, really good passing attack. So those are two stops at the NFL level. He's shown that he can throw the ball in this league in a modern day time as well. And I think it's not we can't overstate the fact that Todd Monken has experience in both the NFL and the college levels. The college game is the NFL goes to the college game a lot for their pass concepts, specifically in just the offensive schemes in general nowadays. So I think it's good to have that diversity. It helps with the creativity for sure to allow guys to be able to think outside the box. A lot of these coaches at the NFL level, sometimes they can get stuck in their ways, and what the way it's been is the way it'll always be for some guys. But I think going to college, it almost forces you to look at the game a little different, and try to find different ways to beat a defense. So I do like that combination as well.
Yeah, and to that point, that's kind of what it felt like with Greg Roman, where I'm not saying he was so stubborn to the point where he was saying, I'm never going to implement anything. I think he was trying.
Right.
It didn't work the way that it needed to work, where in 2019, we saw so much growth from the offense, from Lamar Jackson in Greg Roman's first year. And then that growth just kind of stopped from 2020 on. We didn't see enough of that. And you mentioned Baker Mayfield, it's Jameis Winston, it's Baker Mayfield, it's Stenson Bennett, three quarterbacks who I know people have some definite worries about. And Jameis over these last couple of seasons, I know the injury situation with him has been kind of difficult, but he's a player that I think Todd Monken got really good things out of. Baker Mayfield in his first full year as a starter, that was Todd Monken's year as the offensive coordinator, as you mentioned, Cordell. So it just feels like the right hire, or at least one of the right hires that it could have been for this position. But I think part of this is also the fact that what does it mean for the personnel groupings and personnel wise? I think what Monken can bring, they don't have to overhaul their personnel. They don't have to trade away Patrick Ricard because they're never going to use a fullback ever again. But the wide receiver position, I know, has been a position of eyeballs everywhere on that position. John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta talking about how they're going to take a look at it. I know for a lot of people, are we going to believe you this time? Because they've kind of said some similar stuff. But do you think that the Monken hire, because Monken likes to throw the football, that is part of something about him that I really like. It's the fact that he values that side of the game, and we're going to see some innovative aspects. But do you think that this hire really puts an emphasis on the fact that, the Ravens really might go ahead and overhaul this wide receiver room this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they would have had to do that regardless of, who the offensive coordinator was going to be. It's a glaring hole on their team. And if you want to compete in today's game, you have to have something at the wide receiver group. I feel like, but the Chiefs kind of, going out there doing what they did with, I would argue, not a great receiving core, right? But the combination of Kelsey and Mahomes allows them to be a little flexible in that regard. Lamar and Mark Andrews are, right in that, I think, that world, at least in terms of a quarterback tight end duo. These guys have been able to do some special things together as well. Rashad Bateman out there, if he could stay healthy, it'll help. But I do think Monken is a guy that makes them, maybe to a fault, will make them feel like maybe we don't have to swing for the fences at this position, because maybe, Todd's scheme will be able to maximize what not only what we already have, but what we're able to add. We're not able to necessarily knock it out the park in terms of names at the wide receiver position, in terms of additions, because of financial reasons. But whoever we do add, we can trust that Todd is going to find a way to get everything and then some out of them. So like I said, it could be to a fault that Todd Monken is really good at scheming guys open and really good at coming up with these unique pass concepts, because it may allow the Ravens to feel like what they have is enough.
Yeah, and you mentioned Monken coming over from college. Obviously, the Ravens did that same route technically with Mike McDonald. I know he was with the organization for many years before, so it was an external hire that kind of felt like it was an internal one. But it doesn't change the fact that McDonald went out there to Michigan, ran his own defense for a season, his first time doing something like that, and did it really well. I mean, they were in the college football playoff that year. So he did a great job, and now you're bringing in, again, somebody in Monken, another external candidate. Did you want them to go external with this? Were there any doubts in your mind?
Yeah, I did. To be honest with you, I thought it would have been very telling if they had to go internal, because that would have, to me, meant that the Lamar thing is a big question
Right.
for these guys that they're interviewing outside of the building. But you look at their options inside the building. Wow, those guys have done their own things and they have notches on their resume. I don't think that that's necessarily we wouldn't have felt the same way we do now if they had hired, James Urban or somebody like that. I think for them, option A was to go outside the building. And I think they ended up with the right guy.
Yeah, and I think part of this too is, there have been Monken's running the ball, how he runs the ball, I think is different from some coordinators where he's talked about it before, where he believes, and I mean, this is true, where the short passing game is an extension of the run game. You can scheme guys open in the short passing game for screen passes, something that are practically unheard of in Baltimore over these past many years. That's an aspect of the game that I think is going to be really exciting. I mean, I think the short passing game, just being able to, for Lamar, if he's back too, just being able to take that first read and being able to progress as well, something I think he's been improving on. I'm excited to see what the offense can be as this full out balanced group, but especially in that short passing game.
Yeah, I mean, and that's something that we've been asking for a while, is for the Ravens to get guys like J.K. Dobbins more involved in the pass game. And I think that's what you saw from Todd Monken out in Georgia for sure. He definitely will incorporate the running backs in the pass game, but also at the NFL level. You look at some of the running back catches for those teams, for the Bucks and the Browns when he was the offensive coordinator there, a lot more than what the Ravens running backs got this past year. So, you definitely want to see that. And you talked a little bit about the personnel groupings earlier. I'm excited to see how he can incorporate Isaiah Likely more into this offense. He was able to utilize multiple tight ends at Georgia this past year. I think Isaiah Likely is a heck of a talent. I really do. I think that is another one of the major fumbles from the Ravens this past year offensively, is the fact that they weren't able to get more out of Isaiah Likely, especially once they started to rack up the injuries at the wide receiver position. We know how good Mark Andrews was, but Mark Andrews was really beat up this year. He really could have used somebody else, to kind of help take the load off of him. Isaiah Likely had some really good games when Andrews wasn't playing, but when Andrews was playing, it was almost like he was invisible out there. So I'm excited to see, like you mentioned, how Todd Monken does emphasize the short passing game as an extension of the run game for Lamar. They got to kind of get in Lamar's mind, though, to look that way, because I think in Lamar's mind, he believes that he has a bigger chance of making a big play happen with his legs as opposed to maybe checking it down sometimes. And he may be right, he may be right. But I do think he needs to, test that out a little more than he has in the past. It'll end up benefiting him and the rest of the guys on that offense.
Yeah, and you mentioned that it's a good point, because I think in 2021, I think he improved on it a bit in 2022, but in 2021, there were times with decision making in terms of when to throw and when to run, where we would see him have a wide open lane and he tried to make a play with his arm to try to, get a big chunk down the field. And you're saying, well, you have like 20 yards of open space right there, and vice versa, where I think, again, he got better at that. But I think now with better schemed plays, guys getting open more, being able to utilize the short passing game, there's a lot to like about this hire in Todd Monken. I think the Ravens did a very good job here. But coming up in our final segment, we'll be diving into our mailbag, talking more about Todd Monken, of course, a little bit about the draft, and a lot more. So be sure to stay tuned. So lots to dive into on Locked On Ravens. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. And the midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. And for me, I'm a big Denver Nuggets guy. The Nuggets win against Miami on Monday. They play the Mavericks here today. It's the last game for them before the All-Star break. So if you want to bet on the Nuggets, be sure to check out the money line. It's always moving, especially with Jamal Murray potentially being out until after the All-Star break. Depending on his status, Aaron Gordon's status, it's moving around. And there are so many more exclusive bets, like the 2x3, which is 2 3-pointers scored in the first 3 minutes. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with the same game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. more. Make every moment more. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. We return. It's our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with Cordell Woodland. And Cordell, I think for the Ravens, they, again, as I talked about at the end of the second segment, did a really good job with this hire. But we do have a couple of mailbag questions, and I put this out, in the morning on Tuesday. So the Ravens hiring Todd Monken. And the first question I have here is from Chad Gavison, who says, who was the offensive coordinator? Everything else hinges on that. Well, I can give you the answer. It's Todd Monken. But what's your grade? If you had to give a grade for this hire, what would it be?
Well, we're always optimistic in the off season, right? Every move's a great move. Every draft pick's a great draft. So I don't know. It's so early to tell, but on paper it looks good, right? I think it'll be fresh. Just the fact that it's a fresh new look, fresh new voice coming in, it will amplify these guys. I'm going to have to say it's an A right now. I really like the fact that they, went back to college, although he has NFL experience. I really like adding college guys to your staff because I think they come with those open eyes. They are looking at things from a different lens, whereas NFL, it can kind of get black and white sometimes, and you start to see the same things over and over. But I'm going to give it an A just because I think this will really add to the level of creativity that the Ravens need in the pass game.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, where I feel like the Ravens definitely wanted someone who had some sort of, first of all, just play calling experience in general. But the fact that Monken has it both in college and in the NFL and has seen success at both those levels, I think was something they valued a ton, where you can make an argument that they maybe could have waited. Like for Mike McDonald, no NFL play calling experience coming in. Right. He took him a couple weeks to fully get under his belt, but once he did, it proved to be a really good hire for him. So on offense, you could make the argument that maybe they just couldn't afford to wait. But at the same time, I think what Monken brings you is just the perfect balance of college and NFL experience, where you talked about how the NFL is always looking to college, always adapting from college. Monken can bring you that, having won back-to-back national championships at Georgia, and also has NFL play calling experience on top of that. But our next question, Cordell, comes from Gunny Ravens, who says, hey, KO, with Monken hired as the new offensive coordinator, in your opinion, what notable changes will he bring to advance the offense forward? Also, how would you describe his small stint in Cleveland? Thanks for all the great Ravens content. Well, I'll give you some context, and thank you for the question and the support, Gunny Ravens. But for his Cleveland offense, looking at that 2019 team, Cleveland ended up ranking net yards per attempt wise. They were 17th in the NFL in net yards per attempt passing, but they were the fourth best rushing team that year. So again, I think it just proves the balance, where you can have a very good rushing offense under Monken. You can have the good passing offense under Monken too. But in terms of how he'll change this offense, what his fingerprints will be, how do you think that looks, Gordo?
Well, the one thing I really like about Todd Monken is he's a guy that's going to play to the strengths of the team. You mentioned what he did out in Cleveland, a very balanced attack in the run game and the pass game. But you look at it, what he did in Tampa Bay, it was more of that air raid style of offense because that's the way that they were built. He wasn't a guy that came in there with his own idea of what they were going to be. Instead, he actually tailored it based off of what he had at his disposal. So that's what I'm excited to see. The good thing is, like I mentioned earlier, he's a big fan of 12 personnel. Georgia ran a ton of that. We know the Ravens are going to run a ton of that. So I don't know if we'll get necessarily a bunch of different looks. I still think he's going to go with the strengths of what the Ravens have. And right now, the strengths on this team right now is still the tight end position. So I still think we're going to get the heavy personnel packages. I think it's more so about what are they able to get out of these packages now that they weren't getting before? How big is early down play action going to be compared to years past? I always talk to Jonas Schaefer a lot, and he always mentions back to the quarterback play action passing. How much more of that are we going to see? Because we know how dynamic this Ravens rushing attack has been in the past. Their shortcoming has been not being able to have the pass game be able to capitalize off of the dominant run game that they've had. So I think that'll be more so what we're looking at. We're looking at Todd Monken going with the strengths of the team more than we've seen in the past.
It also, something really interesting is the fact that it feels like in some situations Monken goes like against everything else in a good way.
Mhm.
Where, for example, there was an article in the Athletic, and it's the stats here are on snaps with 8+ defenders in the box. So usually that is a running situation. With Monken, offensive coordinator, Georgia dropped back to pass 30.2% of the time. In 2019, Georgia did it 21.9% of the time. Then on stats with 6 or fewer defenders in the box. So that usually means it's a passing situation.
Mhm.
Georgia called runs 38.5% of the time and 36.6% of the time in those 2 seasons. So, on a 3rd and 1 where, you might think, all right, just give the ball to Gus Edwards, he might throw the football, but
Yeah.
the difference is I think the plays will just be better. Like,
Yes.
I just think that's what it comes down to at the end of the day, where it's play calling and it's execution. Both have to go hand in hand. Sometimes it's play calling, sometimes it's execution. But I think the play calling aspect got a huge boost here.
Yeah, and specifically what the Ravens will need is the red zone play calling to be a lot better than it was this year. The Ravens were putrid in the red zone this year. They were terrible in all the key situational downs in this year. You think of the 4th and shorts, some of the play calling that we saw there, guys breaking the huddle late. Will that change? Will that be something that we see differently? Them not breaking the huddle at 8 seconds on the play clock anymore. I'm looking for a lot of the little things, but specifically situational play calling has got to be a lot better than it's been.
In tempo. Like,
Yeah.
I think putting this offense in no huddle and tempo situations,
Mhm.
Lamar Jackson excels at that. Like, he's
Yeah.
really good in tempo situations. So if he's back in 2023, I would love to see this offense in tempo, just being able to keep the defense off of their toes. And that feels like what Monken does. He's able to keep the defense on their toes and make sure that they don't know what's coming. They have to really, it's a guessing game, and then your personnel speaks for itself there. But finally, we have the take maker who says this is a completely different topic about the draft. But why do a lot of people's draft boards have us drafting a running back? The team has seen success with JK and Gus when healthy. I know there were questions surrounding how the season ended for JK, but is there something more that I'm not seeing here? And so I think what the take maker is referring to is the Bijan Robinson picks at 22. Where, look, I'm not denying the talent of Bijan Robinson. I think he's going to be a player at the NFL level. But for me, I mean, there are a couple of questions I know with Dobbins and Edwards and, contract situations, what their future is like in Baltimore. But I think they're fine there for now. Wide receiver and corner, to me, Cordell, seem like the 2 that I'd be looking at 22, especially with the fact that as of this moment, Baltimore doesn't have a second rounder.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you there. I think 1st round though is going to be best available, most likely. Out of and probably predominantly out of the wide receiver and cornerback positions. But drafting running backs in the 1st round nowadays in the NFL is kind of like the golden rule of what not to do. Not to say that Robinson won't be worth that type of pick, but I just don't see the Ravens using a 1st round pick on a running back. I will say though, I do expect them to draft a running back. Though I really would not be surprised if we see them draft one. They've got to get cheap labor from somewhere. And you with J.K. Dobbins going into a pivotal 4th year in a year where they don't have the 5th year option on J.K. He wasn't a 1st round pick, so they're going to have to figure out what they want to do with him after this season. And I like J.K. just as much as anybody. You're right; he's been nothing short of great when healthy. But we haven't gotten to see a lot of JK. We haven't. His usage level has been very low when he has been available, and then you have the times when he's been hurt. So it's not. I don't think it'll be an easy decision to make, especially considering some of their other needs, as well as having to extend a guy like Lamar Jackson. It's just going to be tough to do. Gus Edwards, he may be a cap casualty this offseason. We don't know. But I do think that they're going to end up having to add something to this running back room this offseason. I wouldn't be surprised if it's via the draft.
Right. And for Dobbins, I think the status he's had over 15 carries just once in his
Yeah,
NFL career, or maybe it's twice now, but it's a
twice
very
now.
low. It's
Yeah,
one or twice,
yeah,
once or twice. So for him, I think he deserves more touches for sure. But you're right. What does a contract year look like for J.K. Dobbins? And the Ravens historically have not paid running backs.
right.
It's kind of like they have a guy like Gus Edwards that was, I think, a 3-year, 12 million, 3-year, 15 million deal. that's a solid number for Gus Edwards. But what if Dobbins has a breakout, 1,000-yard, 10-touchdown year, and a team wants to pay him $30 million over 3 or $35 million over 4? Would the Ravens be willing to do that? Then you look to the draft maybe in what happens there. But yeah, for me, I don't think Bijan Robinson is going to be a bad NFL player. Like, I'm not saying don't pick him in the first round because he's going to be bad. I think he's going to be really good. But I think you have to maximize, especially with a potential Lamar extension, you have to maximize positions of need in the draft. And I still think the most likely option is probably trading that pick and picking up a late first and a second round pick somewhere. I think that's a plausible option for him. But for wide receiver and corner, that's probably where I'm looking. But you're right. Best available is probably what they're going to do. I mean, we saw it with Kyle Hamilton last year at 14, where that was still, in my opinion, the right pick. And Hamilton definitely showed that. But for the right pick, I think the Ravens did it with Todd Monken, and we'll see what happens. It's an exciting day, exciting week here for, I think, the Ravens as they get their guy. It is Todd Monken, both NFL and college play calling experience. But Cordell, I appreciate you hopping on with me here today. Thank you so much. Please tell people where they can find you in your work and what you're working on.
Yeah, man, Kevin, always a pleasure joining you, man. Appreciate the invite. I'm here whenever you need me. God knows you help me out so much on my show, Shaking It Up, which you guys can hear on 105.7 The Fan. I'm on weeknights on that station. I'm also co-host of Winning Drive podcast with Rita Hubbard. You can find that podcast anywhere you get your podcast from as well. And I'm on Twitter at Cordell Woodland.
Be sure to check out all of Cordell's work. It will be in the description below. And I always appreciate going on your show too, Cordell. And so check that out. You maybe will hear me if you tune in. So be sure he has a ton of content lined up 5 days a week there for Cordell. So I appreciate you. And be sure, if you're here on YouTube, like and subscribe to the channel here, and also in audio form anywhere you get your podcast, follow along. But thank you again, Cordell. That's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. I'm going to get back here tomorrow. It is more Ravens content from us, still continuing to discuss the Todd Monken hire. So be sure to stay tuned for that, and I will see you right back here tomorrow.